Support for This News is So Gay comes from the LGBTQ Opportunity Fund of the Cleveland Foundation, leveraging philanthropy to empower LGBTQ communities. Welcome to This News is So Gay. I'm your host, Ken Schneck, editor of the Buckeye Flame, Ohio's LGBTQ newsroom. Thanks so much for joining us. This has been an absolutely wild week for the LGBTQ community, thrown into stories we would be thrilled to be nowhere near. How are LGBTQ journalists keeping up? There is so much happening in Texas. We're going to dive into some of the latest and try to answer the question, what is going on in the Lone Star State? An LGBTQ Media Mapping Report is now officially out for everyone to see. How are LGBTQ newsrooms faring out there in the world? And of course, where is our roundtable finding queer joy in the news lately? Joining us this week to answer those questions and so many more, News and Rapid Response Coordinator for GLAAD, Jacob Reyes. Jacob, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Managing Director for News is Out, a national collaborative of the leading local queer news publishers, Dana Piccoli. Dana, welcome back to the show.
Nice to be here again.
And the founder and editor-in-chief of Uncloseted Media, an investigative media company providing you with objective, nonpartisan, rigorous, original journalism that examines America's anti-LGBTQ landscape and elevates everyday American heroes. Spencer Macnaughton. Spencer, welcome.
Ken, thank you so much for having me.
Well, our LGBTQ Reporters Roundtable is now assembled, so let's dive in. So I actually debated quite a bit where I wanted to start this week. It obviously has been such a wild, dizzying news week. And I just keep coming back to the struggle, at least at the Buckeye Flame, of simply keeping up. Every hour, the story around Charlie Kirk's murder changed, and the LGBTQ community was tossed into the mix with details about messages on shell casings and possible trans roommates and anti-LGBTQ prior speeches. Everything was proven and then debunked and then referenced again, rinse and repeat. Jacob, I want to start with you. Rapid Response Coordinator is right there in your job title, which I do not want that in my job title, Jacob Reyes. How do we begin to approach community response when the narrative changes, it feels like hourly?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Ken, and thank you for the question. We know this has been a lot for people to process these last few days. And, you know, with GLAAD, we've been doing this for about 40 years now. We have a history to build on when it comes to responding to breaking news. And we always return to what we know, and that means elevating facts. Rapid response is scary, but rapid response is also accurate response. It's thoughtful response, and it's very careful response. And GLAAD is committed to accuracy and care, especially now, especially when we've seen what we've seen the last few days. For example, gun violence is, first of all, a nonpartisan issue. It affects all communities, and it disproportionately hurts LGBTQ people, Latina people, and folks from other marginalized communities. And at GLAAD, we're always going to be urging media to include LGBTQ voices in stories about LGBTQ people, because it improves the accuracy of those stories. It humanizes our community. And I think we need a lot more of that to continue accelerating that acceptance that our organization is so focused on every day.
Dana, then there's the part where there actually is other LGBTQ news out there going on as other events are unfolding, some of which we are going to discuss. How do you go about prioritizing?
My priority is always the LGBTQ community, our readers, giving them information and facts that they need to understand what's happening in the world and how they can advocate better for themselves.
Professor Spencer, our resident journalism professor on this week's episode at my alma mater, NYU. How would you advise our future journalists through times like this?
I think, thank you for having me again. And I think it's a tricky time to be a journalism professor in 2025. But the thing that I really try to tell my students, at least, and also the younger folks on my team at Uncloseted Media, is to really understand that in America, the definition of journalistic balance isn't a Republican soundbite and a Democratic soundbite divided by two. And I think that's where a lot of the American mainstream media kind of goes when it comes to journalistic balance. It should be a definition of methodologically sound, evidence-based research. And I think that's where the mainstream media gets lost, that when Republicans think trans people don't deserve to exist and Democrats believe that they do, the answer isn't in the middle. There can be a difference when it comes to the human rights of a marginalized community or any community, right? So I think that's usually what I teach on day one, is to really understand the nuances of balance and the warped conception a lot of American media has as it relates to what balance is meant to be in journalism. And I think that's really, really important to understand, especially this week, as we've seen how the mainstream media has reacted to the news and often been putting out unverified claims at a time when it's so dangerous to do that, when we already have the knowledge that putting out claims like there could have been a transgender ideology, which wasn't true, is going to stoke such a fire on a community that's already attacked. And it's so irresponsible to do that. So I think really teaching them what balance really should mean and what it should not mean.
I would also have to imagine, Spencer, that you're talking to them about journalism self-care as well, which could not be more important, especially right now for LGBTQ plus journalists.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of the folks that I have folks on my team who are trans. Most people identify as LGBTQ in some way. And there's not much else to say other than to really just self-care, do what you need to do to practice mindfulness, to practice wellness, take a break if you need to. And it's only going to come with time, where you learn to compartmentalize what you do at the office and what you do in your personal life. I mean, I embedded with the Ku Klux Klan. I remember a year out of college, and I was there for 2 weeks with so much hate. And I remember after I got home from doing that, I just cried for many days, and I didn't understand why. And I think it's a really great question that we should be doing more in newsrooms, especially newsrooms with young people, is really teaching about how to turn off, or to how to compartmentalize, or how to implement self-care when we're covering topics that are so personal, but we also need to remain with kind of a wall of objectivity too. So it's a really tricky balance, and something that isn't talked about enough, I don't think.
I can't believe the concept of taking a break is so revolutionary, even as I'm sitting here right now and thinking, how would that work? Dana, do you take breaks?
What?
Yeah, about summed it up. That about summed it up. And Jacob, if you have some mindfulness technique for us, we are here for it.
Once I figure it out, I'll let y'all know.
All right. So,
And I don't have any good ones either. But okay.
this is not the best role model panel I've ever put together, but the concepts.
Okay, no, but seriously though, reading, putting the phone down, stopping. It's hard, right? When you're part of the news cycle and also writing about the news cycle, it's hard to put it away. Reading, it calms the mind, it opens your mind. That is really the only thing I've found that helps.
All right. We're going to be doing a special episode on self-care. None of us on this panel will be on that special episode, just so folks know.
I can't wait to listen to it.
That would require taking a break, Jacob, something that we don't do. So we'll work on that. All right. Let's talk about Texas. And you would think that I would be starting with the vice president of the board of directors for Texas Latino Pride, Jacob Reyes, but I'm not. So you're just going to have to sit there and think about what you've done for a second, Jacob. A professor was fired at Texas A&M over a, quote, illegal gender identity lesson in her literature course. Dana, can you start by giving us the rundown on what happened here?
Okay, so Texas A&M fired Professor Melissa McCool after a viral video that a student took challenging her for teaching about gender ideology in a children's literature course. Now, the student claims that it was against their beliefs and possibly illegal based on Trump's executive order declaring that there are only two genders, male and female. Soon after, university leadership said that McCool's materials didn't align with the official course description, and then they also removed the Dean of Arts and Sciences and the English department chair. So now McCool disputes this, saying that her class matched the catalog and she was never told to change it. Well, now the firing has drawn political attention, with Republican lawmakers, Governor Abbott weighing in, and it's raising questions about academic freedom, censorship, and whether faculty can address LGBT topics at all without fear of backlash or retaliation. Now, You should note Professor McCool is appealing the firing and exploring further legal action.
Listeners, you should know that Jacob Reyes is dying to get into this conversation right now. I can see it on his face. And yet, I'm still pivoting. Spencer, there has been some pushback from local groups highlighting that faculty are clearly under attack. I am a tenured professor of education. This is part of my life. I'm going to ask you to keep that professor hat on. How do we even begin to wrap our minds around censorship in college classrooms right now?
Honestly, I have no idea. It's so complex and it's so honestly above professors' pay grades in many ways to figure out what to do in this situation. I mean, your job is literally on the line if you don't push back. And I just think one thing to note, is the irony of Republicans pushing back against freedom of speech in this way. It's always they're the party of freedom of speech. But when you look at what's happening on college campus, there's, a huge hypocrisy to that. I have no clue. I mean, we have to have people outside of professors. It can't be up to professors to hold the line. We need people higher up in academia and beyond to actually get involved and to push back against this censorship, because it's such a slippery slope when you just start, removing marginalized groups, LGBTQ references from academia, from education. Because if people at higher levels aren't learning about the queer community, that's just another step toward erasing us. So I think it's one thing for professors and a very courageous professor in Texas to file a lawsuit. But I think a lot of people are too afraid to do that. I mean, they have to feed families. They have to go home. They don't want to have their name in the headlines like this, embroiled in a lawsuit. So I think we need other people, and I don't exactly know who those people are in academia, in these institutions, to actually join the fight and really push back loudly and vocally.
Jacob, I have made you wait long enough. This state where you live has passed a slew of anti-LGBTQ plus laws. There's the bathroom bill, which we discussed on a prior episode, to a bill resulting in some high schools eliminating their LGBTQ plus student clubs. Texas seems not great right now. Kind of a nightmare for LGBTQ plus individuals. I say from someone looking over from Cleveland. Am I getting that wrong from my outside perspective?
I mean, where do I even begin?
I'm excited to find out.
First of all, I mean, just the record numbers of anti-LGBTQ bills that we've seen in the last 2 sessions. Texas has legislative sessions every other year. The record number of anti-LGBTQ bills that we've seen should be concerning for not just queer Texans, for not just trans Texans, for Texans who are looking for a place to express themselves, whether it be on a college campus, whether it be anywhere in the state of Texas. This is concerning for all Texas. A nightmare may be the correct assumption from afar. And I think being from here, I believe there's still power in optimism. And I do believe the work happening in Texas still is something that is worth celebrating. We see what the professor is doing. Again, not every professor has this privilege to fight back, to challenge a firing or a course censorship. But I do believe the work happening in Texas to celebrate, to uplift us, to create a place for us to remain visible, that is great. And at the same time, it's often overshadowed by the setbacks. And so I'm really glad that we're able to highlight the professor's ability to say, this is unacceptable. We are pushing back. And that's just one of many, many, many examples happening in Texas. One of many great examples happening in Texas.
I was going to say, because it's not great for tourism, because Spencer, Dana, and I were thinking about taking a break and going somewhere. And Texas, not at the top of our list right now, but I have to imagine that with your work with Texas Latino Pride, that you do have access to hope, that you do have access to queer, joyous activities.
I love the word hope. I'm a student of history, and Harvey Milk and Barack Obama are people that I look to for that optimism that is instilled in me as a Texan, as a Latino, as a gay man. And, hope is found through each other here in Texas. Not even 48 hours ago, Texas Latino Pride hosted its 11th annual festival. And the early numbers are saying close to 4,000 folks in attendance. Earlier this year, Dallas hosted its Queer and Trans Liberation March with close to 1,000 in attendance. These are queer, trans, ally Texans who are speaking for the queer and trans community. And not just that, we have Equality Texas, the Transgender Education Network of Texas, the Help Center based in Fort Worth, the Dallas Social Queer Organization, so many more that are providing life-saving resources for LGBTQ Texans. And we not only see the headlines, we see all these headlines. How many times a day do I hear the word Greg Abbott? Oh my gosh. But we see the headlines, we live it. At the very least, every day, we lean on each other for those resources, for that community, for that love, and for that hope.
Can I give a shout out to Dallas Voice, who is also doing excellent work and coverage of LGBT issues in Dallas and has been for 40 years now.
Wow.
Incredible. I am slightly more inclined for a visit. I'm not totally there yet, but we're going to work on it. Well, just a few weeks ago on our special episode, Extra Extra, where we featured journalism legend Tracy Baim, and I will give a shout out. We have another special episode of Extra Extra coming up in a few weeks with Anna Deshawn. So folks are going to have to tune into that one. But on this one a few weeks ago, we featured Tracy Baim, and we teased the release of the LGBTQ Media Mapping Report. The report is now out and in people's hands and on their screens. Dana, News is Out was such a huge part of the creation of this report. Give us the key takeaways that we need to know about the landscape.
Yes, this report gives us so much important information. One of the big things that the report shows is that almost half of LGBTQ plus outlets are running on less than $100,000 a year. Many have no full-time staff, just freelancers or volunteers trying to keep it all going. They're also, in general, heavily dependent on advertising, but that revenue has taken a nosedive in recent years as companies back away from diversity marketing. And what's striking is that reader support and philanthropy, which could really make a difference, is still pretty largely untapped. Another huge finding is the number of queer news deserts. Millions of LGBTQ plus people live in areas with no local queer media at all. There are 18 states with no LGBTQ plus media at all. A lot of those gaps are in the Mountain West and the Midwest, but they do exist all over. And even if you're in a state that has LGBTQ plus media, you may be in a completely different part of the state, and so that's not as applicable to you. Here's the flip side. Audiences are actually bigger than ever. Younger generations, especially Gen Z, where 1 in 5 identify as LGBTQ plus, are hungry for local news and representation, and outlets are seeing record readership and engagement. And what's encouraging is that many outlets are much more open to collaborating now. And I'm a big fan of collaborations. I run one. So whether that's sharing stories, pooling resources, fundraising together, and that wasn't always the case in the past. And so the bottom line is that LGBTQ plus media is vital, but we're really under-resourced and at risk. So the report's basically a call to action for funders, advertisers, and readers alike.
I love that collaboration idea, and we would love to do that more. We're just merging Uncloseted Media and the Buckeye Flame by the end of this episode. But Spencer's finding that out right now. As someone who has created an LGBTQ plus news outlet, Spencer, just in the past couple of years, I have to imagine that you feel the results of this report pretty deeply. Talk to us about the motivation in launching a queer outlet and the challenges, unless there are no challenges in keeping it going and everything is fine.
Definitely not true. And fascinating to hear, Dana, your findings from the report, because so much of that resonates with what we do in our day-to-day. I launched Uncloseted Media last year. I worked in mainstream media for over a decade at 60 Minutes and the Wall Street Journal. And like I said, covered a lot of far-right extremism, many manifestations of hate, but just realized there wasn't a go-to publication for America's anti-LGBTQ ecosystem. And these groups are far more insidious a lot of the time than like the Michigan militia or terrorist groups that I covered. It's not lost little boys in basements a lot of the time. It's people with real power, money, and resources to get things done to roll back our rights in real time. mainstream media wasn't covering it, and the queer media that was for profit a lot of the time didn't have the bandwidth to do these rigorous deep dives. So I knew it had to be nonprofit because I knew there was no way we could sustain ourselves financially without that kind of philanthropic support. And kind of to Dana's point, I think that's where things are moving in a large way. And yeah, our big mission is to really fill that gap in rigorous journalism. And to Dana's point on partnerships, is that's been everything for us, is partnering with not only big queer media organizations, but what's amazing for us is I want Uncloseted to break out of the queer media echo chamber. So we reach all Americans in every county in all 50 states. So we've been on the cover of the Idaho Statesman and the Chicago Sun-Times and partnered with the Oregonian and the Michigan Advance. And we want more and more and more of that as a way to be kind of like a national level resource for LGBTQ storytelling, but then partnering and marrying with these mainstream publications on the local level to at least in some way fill what Dana was saying about the queer news desert sort of thing. So that's kind of who we are. The challenges are fundraising, really. Getting that support has been really difficult. I'll say breaking through to the foundations has been exceptionally difficult, almost and disappointingly so, I would say. So much red tape for these small 501c3s where you have to have 15 phone calls kind of thing, and we just don't have the bandwidth. I am the fundraiser, right? So a lot of the bigger organizations, I think, wind up getting a lot bigger piece of the pie at a time when what me and a lot of the other organizations need is fractional in terms of an operating budget.
I was really surprised, Dana. I went into the report thinking, well, all of these LGBTQ newsrooms are nonprofit. That was so not the findings of this report.
Actually, very few.
It's really just me and Spencer. No, there are a couple others, but I was really surprised by that. And everything that you just said, Spencer, resonates so deeply. We made a hire maybe 3 months ago at the Buckeye Flame to hire a development director. And I definitely had moments of, gosh, but we need another reporter. We need more content coming. And so to assume that expense, which is not a reporter, was I had to convince myself on that one. And it's working out and it's really important. But wow, that is something that so many of us need and not a privilege that everybody has. It's some real challenges out there.
If I can add one more thing to that, just because it totally resonated with what both you and Dana said, is the idea of partnering for grants as well, I think is everything. Like a few newsrooms have now reached out to me, like for example, Queer Kentucky, I can say this because we just did it, we're collaborating where we have the bandwidth to do rigorous reporting. They have boots on the ground in Kentucky. So we're pitching a few foundations on 10 queer focused stories in Appalachia. And I hope more and more of that happens now where there's that partnership going for these bigger grants, because it also has bigger impact in the end.
Missy Spears was on our episode last week, and we just decided we're sister publications, but they're a little bit cooler than we are. And we accept that. We accept that at the Buckeye Flame. Jacob, this is obviously the very work of GLAAD to help shape the media narrative. Just last week, I wrote to a local reporter, and I was thrilled that they were covering LGBTQ plus issues, but they were using incorrect language. At that point, they were saying openly LGBTQ instead of out, as per GLAAD's media guide, which I think we have memorized at this point. How is GLAAD navigating this landscape these days of queer media?
Well, thank you for being an ambassador for GLAAD and promoting our great media reference guide. You're hired as one of our volunteer news bureau chiefs, so we really appreciate that, Ken. But no, that's exactly why the media reference guide was created. It originally launched about 30 years ago to help reporters, to help the public just understand and get to know the LGBTQ community and find the best practices on reporting on the community. And we continuously update it. It's more than 20 topics. We have experts in the field from healthcare, HIV, youth, communities of color, sports, and so many more. That includes updated terminologies and what to even avoid. It's free. It's available on our website. We use it to brief reporters. We use it for newsroom trainings and to improve problematic coverage, as you just highlighted. And we even have a section on dead names, the name of a transgender person that they no longer use, and why that's important for reporters to get right, and not always directly repeat information from officials, from law enforcement officials that may not accurately identify the person. And as the community grows, it's more important than ever to give reporters and everyday people the resources they need to be accurate and respectful when referring to the LGBTQ community. And again, like you pointed out, the GLAAD Media Reference Guide recommends using out instead of openly. Openly is dated, implies closet and shame, and out is about agency, out is about empowerment. And the language that we use to describe ourselves is important. And we want media to keep up with where the community is so they can accurately cover and reflect us.
I hope folks caught this. Never has there been a more nonprofit thing said than when Jacob Reyes said to me, "You're hired as our volunteer." So I just want to make sure that folks caught that
I noticed
one.
that too.
Funding. We're talking about grants and stuff. Yeah, same.
I'm still putting it on my LinkedIn, but
Hey, yeah.
here we are, folks. You are listening to This News is So Gay. I'm your host, Ken Schneck from the Buckeye Flame. Joining me this week are Jacob Reyes from GLAAD, Dana Piccoli from News is Out, and Spencer Macnaughton from Uncloseted Media. Well, it is another week and thus another discussion of bans. Let's talk about some of them. Dana, in Alabama, we apparently have a proposed ban on pro-trans books from state libraries.
Oh boy, Ken. This one. Okay, so the Alabama Public Library System is looking at a new library rule that would move any book with a positive description of transgender people, gender identity, or even the idea of more than two genders out of the kids and teen sections, and they would only be allowed in the adult section. Now, get this, the rules only target positive depictions. So if a book portrays transgender people negatively, it can stay. Now, this all comes from groups like Clean Up Alabama, which have put out a list of titles that they want gone, and that includes picture books like Calvin, which is about a trans child, Door by Door, the biography of Sarah McBride, and even Red, a crayon story, a children's book about identity. And now the state is taking public comment, and this is where listeners come in, until October 14th. And so advocacy groups are encouraging people to push back, write letters, attend hearings, follow their templates if you need something to use.
See, Texas Library's not looking so bad right now, are they, Jacob? But not to be outdone, I hear GLAAD is coordinating a book drive.
We are, Ken. And we have a long-standing partnership with Little Bee Books because our CEO, Sarah Kate Ellis, saw there were a few books that represented LGBTQ families like hers. And one of those books was part of a recent Supreme Court challenge earlier this year where a small handful of parents opted out of stories that featured LGBTQ people. So GLAAD is now sending a copy of that book, Uncle Bobby's Wedding, to every member of Congress and the Supreme Court in case they didn't read it, because we know that books are proxies for people. And when you exclude our stories, it's really about excluding us and the LGBTQ story. And the LGBTQ story is the American story. And it's time that people defend it. It really is the sweetest story, Uncle Bobby's Wedding. It's about a niece who's worried about her uncle's wedding and if it means that she will spend less time with him. And as a proud Theo myself, I know that reading and sharing our stories is how we learn about each other and ourselves. LGBTQ stories and people belong in our schools, they belong in our library, they belong in our living room, and we deserve that representation.
I have 5 nieces. They are all now getting a copy. Pivoting over to gender-affirming care bans, Spencer, I can barely wrap my mind around your piece on James Cantor. For folks who don't know, James Cantor, the sexologist who testifies all over the country, including here in Ohio, and was quoted heavily here in Ohio with our gender-affirming care ban. First, let's just do some level setting. James Cantor has never actually treated a trans child?
No, he's never treated a trans child. His background, and he's from my home country of Canada. He's not American either, and has never treated a trans child. His background is in kink, fetish, BDSM, kind of like a sex therapist sort of thing. And he started publishing really opinion pieces that weren't really rooted in methodologically sound evidence-based research about gender-affirming care. And the Southern Poverty Law Center designated anti-LGBTQ hate group, the Alliance Defending Freedom, caught wind of what he was saying and essentially cherry-picked him to be a medical expert for one of their cases looking at gender-affirming care. And since then, there's been that spin-off effect where he's been picked up and used as a medical expert in dozens of cases, predominantly about gender-affirming care for kids in the United States. And he's testified in these cases across the country for the last few years, to the point where he said it's a full salaried job for him. And he implied he's making six figures at this.
It's a wild story, including how he is well coiffed, and that gets him indoors. What did you learn from your talk with him? Everyone has to check out this piece, but what did you learn from your talk with him that would help us put all of this in perspective?
I learned that the misinformation doesn't stop on TV. It doesn't stop on social media. It's baked into courtrooms and state legislatures. And it's really, I think it's fair to say there can be some nuances when we talk about the complexities of gender affirming care for trans kids. You know, we can have healthy debates for people who actually understand all these nuances, who deeply understand the science. That's not what's happening on the side with people like James Cantor, right? He's not coming in and respectfully looking at the science and what it says and what it doesn't say and how we can have a nuanced debate. He's been cherry-picked because he wants to come in hard and fast and have a moment in the courtroom. I mean, he described himself of having a good hair day, of looking like, you know, somebody on the cast of Ally McBeal and feeling himself. And he's a child actor, so how could he not? And he walks in there and plays the part and throws a bag of dynamite so the judge can not know which side to go with. It was honestly crazy. I mean, I urge people to listen to this interview and what he said. But I think I left that interview thinking he's talking about how he's having a good hair day, where the kids whose lives are on the line thinking about this aren't actually being represented by folks who actually give a shit about them. And I think that's something that should piss every single American off. It's being misinformed in a courtroom to make actual laws about children in this country, and to use medical experts who have been cherry-picked by hate groups to decide the fate of the healthcare of a lot of children in this country is despicable.
And if a listener out there had an Ally McBeal reference on your bingo card for this week's episode, you will get a Buckeye Flame hoodie, because none of us had that going. Well, with all of this talk of bands, we have to pivot to some queer joy, and it is time for our favorite segment. That would be Glitter Bomb. You don't even need to do the sound effect, Dana. We have one now. That's what's so exciting. This is where our roundtable shares stories of queer joy that they are seeing out there in the world. And not only do we have the sound effect, Dana, but producer Gray has to play it every time I say the word glitter bomb. So let's set off our glitter bomb. Where are you all finding queer joy? Jacob, let's start with you. Where are you seeing a story of queer joy that inspires you?
I am seeing queer joy, especially now here in Texas. It is Latina Heritage Month today, and I see queer joy in my people. Okay, like I said, we celebrated Texas Latino Pride this weekend, and we worked with Telemundo Dallas to highlight Texas Latino Pride and make sure that LGBTQ Latinas were shown in a positive light. And it was a rarity, but still something that we're very, very proud of, to show that Latina and LGBTQ people, despite the setbacks, despite the unfortunate circumstances that we often find ourselves in, that there's a place for us to be celebrated. So on this Latina Heritage Month, my people give me queer joy, and my people being celebrated on TV, in media, that is my queer joy.
I love it. Good luck following that up. Spencer Macnaughton, where are you finding queer joy?
I am finding queer joy in a story we just released a few days ago in partnership with Gander, the Gander Newsroom, a small Michigan digital newspaper, about a story of unlikely allyship. And it was an evangelical pastor who grew up in the space of evangelism, learning that anyone who's LGBTQ is disordered, which is obviously false. But then he had to reconcile everything he'd been brought up to believe when his daughter came out as trans. And it did not happen overnight, but over the next few years, he learned so much about himself and crossed over and is now an absolute ally and her biggest champion and their best friends. And I just thought that was such a representation of what we need right now, finding people who can overcome feelings of uncertainty or even ambivalence toward the queer community when it's put right in front of your face. So I thought it's a very beautiful story.
Read that one, loved that one. Dana Piccoli, where are you finding queer joy in the news?
So on TikTok, there's a creator named Amanda W. Timpson, and her handle is Yesterqueers. And she delves into LGBTQ plus history. She's a queer public historian, and she does a really excellent job of balancing queer joy with the issues of yesteryear and the pressing issues of today. I just really enjoy her content, and it makes me happy.
We love archived material. Thank you for that. So much queer joy. And finally, Sabrina Carpenter made headlines last week with her performance of her new song Tears at the MTV Video Music Awards, where I maybe had heard of every third or fourth artist. So I have some work to do to catch up to what's going on in culture right now. That particular performance from Sabrina Carpenter featured drag superstars, many of them with pro-trans signs like "In Trans We Trust" and "Protect Trans Rights." So what I need from you all for our quick queer question of the week, what is your favorite LGBTQ plus award show memory? Spencer, we'll start with you. And if it is somehow some sort of Canadian award show memory, you get extra points.
Any Juno, any moments come to mind?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I don't think I have a memory of a show, but I do remember when I was in grade 7, definitely knew I was gay already, watching Christina Aguilera's Beautiful video and seeing two men like actually make out with tongue involved. I was like, okay, I'm 100% gay now. I can just come out. I had to wait a few years, but I was very much ready.
And then she kissed Britney and Madonna and everything on the award show. And that was amazing. So amazing. Jacob Reyes?
Chris Colfer winning the Golden Globe for Glee warmed my heart. If you look, if the clip is on YouTube, it's the moment of shock, it's the moment of appreciation, it's the moment of gratitude. That queer joy and that you see in his acceptance speech, as a Gleek, it warmed my heart. And Chris Colfer is one of the great representations of just queer acting, and I'm glad that he got that recognition.
I love that. I remember that one vividly. He was in shock at that roundtable. Dana Piccoli, give me an award show memory.
2005 Tony Awards. Cherry Jones, okay? At the time, she's dating Sarah Paulson, who was starring in The Glass Menagerie. Now, Cherry Jones wins Best Actress for Doubt. And she thanked not Sarah, but the character that she was playing in Glass Menagerie, Laura Wingfield. And all the queers in the audience and watching on television knew what she meant, and that one always sticks out to me.
I love that. That was a deep cut, Dana.
A musical theater kid right here, you know?
I just want to remind everyone, Dana will be singing song selections from Little Shop of Horrors on next week's episode.
Are you gonna duet with me, Suddenly Seymour? I
cannot tell you, as I used to work at the Duplex in New York City, there is no song that made me more money to put me through grad school than Suddenly Seymour. So we don't joke about Suddenly Seymour in this house, Dana. Never. But first, before our rendition, we want to hear what you all are working on. Jacob, what are you working on?
Now I'm going to work on making sure that Texas is appealing enough for all of you to come visit me here in Dallas. But more importantly, GLAAD and myself, we're going to continue highlighting Texans who are adamant about creating a safe space for LGBTQ folks and youth, no matter what happens at the state or federal level. Right now, we're working with a reporter on a resource guide for teachers who still want to find an inclusive environment in their classrooms. And on a more serious note, I also want to focus on things that still affect our community, including HIV rates among Latino men. They continue to rise. We need to continue sharing their stories in not just queer outlets and mainstream outlets, and elevate their perspectives, just so we could get a better understanding of what health and accessibility is and what that means for Latinos, specifically Latino men. And again, we're going to be celebrating Latina Day Heritage Month by reminding audiences of LGBTQ Latinos supporting and celebrating our community, not just in Texas, but across the United States. And we hope to do that through local media, through queer media, through national media. That is my priority. I have a fun saying that I often say at work is that I'm a Texan first, and then I work for GLAAD. That's my approach every day to work. And that means I get to highlight my community members. It means I get to highlight my friends in local media and in national media. That's my top priority every day when I wake up.
So important. And we are thankful you are doing that work. Dana Piccoli, what are you working on?
Listen, I'm going to be spreading this media mapping project far and wide, trying to get as many people on board with understanding the ecosystem of queer media and our challenges and our triumphs. So you're going to see a lot of that from me in the coming months, I would say.
We want folks to share that report. Spencer, what are you working on?
Yeah, we're working on a lot of stuff. I would say in the near future, we're looking at kind of a little bit deeper dives into the new fight, unfortunately, to overturn Obergefell. So tomorrow we have a timeline coming out where we've done a chronology of every single recent move that's been made to try and overturn gay marriage. And then later, likely this weekend, we have an investigation into Liberty Counsel. That's the Christian legal group representing Kim Davis in her new petition to ask the Supreme Court to revisit it, and it's a very sobering read.
I bet. Here on this podcast, we always say thrice divorced Kim Davis, but yes, you could just say Kim Davis, but we understand it. That, my friends, is all the time that we have for this week. I want to thank our roundtable, Jacob Reyes from GLAAD. Jacob, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dana Piccoli, my buddy. We'll be singing together soon. Thanks for appearing here this week, Dana.
Thanks for having me.
And Spencer Macnaughton from Uncloseted Media. Thanks for everything you all are doing there.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Ken Schneck, editor of the Buckeye Flame, and if you liked this episode of This News is So Gay, please share it with a friend, rate and review it on your favorite podcasting app, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on our next episode. In the meantime, read LGBTQ plus news, share the stories of LGBTQ plus reporters, and support the work of LGBTQ plus newsrooms. Until next week, friends.